Today I'm combining two subscribers' questions with the topic that I already had planned, and we're musing into what to expect and how to handle the transition from 5th edition to D&D 5.5 or 24 or the 2024 rules of the 5th edition, whatever it is that you're calling them. I really wish WotC had come up with a name, don't you? I want to start with a special thank you to B. Lynn and Watch Me Learn It for asking these questions and pushing this topic up on my Do It Now Fool list. B. Lynn asked a number of questions, including, what edition changes have I gone through? If I've been involved in the edition wars, what I brought along from older editions, and what was I glad got left behind, as well as if an edition change is a time to push the group to try other role-playing games. Meanwhile, Watch Me Learn It asked more about the process, including how to manage player expectations, handle rules debates, and actually make the transition. So, let's dig into those. What edition changes have I gone through? I started playing D&D about 28 years ago. I was 12 years old playing D&D in somebody's mother's basement. You know, before that was a meme. I've since gone on to an edition change from 2nd edition to 3rd, from 3rd to 3.5, from 3.5 on to 4th, and from 4th on to 5th. So I've gone through a couple of these, and I would say that I've experienced each of them very differently. You know, there was a tiny bit of a break between my 2nd edition days and my 3rd edition days. I clung to 3.5 longer than is reasonable, and probably jumped ship from 4th to 5th fairly suddenly by comparison. So I've kind of run the gamut when it comes to the different ways of switching editions, and also just my experience with them. I also have tried a bunch of other little RPGs in the middle, but never at a point of transition before. I never really engaged in what I would call the edition wars. I'm not a terribly confrontational person, so I don't really like to argue over things, and though I have always had a very strong preference towards the game system that I'm using, I've never felt the need to rag on other people's systems or get mad that somebody didn't like the system that I was using. That's never felt like something that was worth engaging in, and I definitely don't regret not engaging in those kinds of arguments and nastiness that surrounds the different editions. I get a lot of people occasionally dropping comments about how much they hate what's coming out with 5.5, and that's a totally reasonable stance. Like, if you really love 5th edition as it is, and none of your group wants to make the change, then you definitely shouldn't. And that should be okay with people who are diehard about these new rules and really excited for the changes that they're going to see. D&D is for everyone, right? And everybody has the opportunity to play what they want to play, and there's no real reason why we should be so harsh on other people about their preferences. When it comes to what have I brought forward with me from old editions, I don't think you can help but bring a little bit with you when you change editions of D&D, simply because there's things that you're going to have liked. For me, the bloodied condition was definitely one of them. Up until now, it hasn't had any kind of mechanical crunch to it, though it's coming back in 5.5, or whatever we're calling it. But the term bloodied to mark a point when you get past half hit points has been useful to me for narration purposes, just so that I can describe when somebody actually takes a significant hit and can give information to the group so that they know sort of what the stage of the encounter is at, and then we can subvert expectations when needed. So bloodied is really useful. I also bring forward some rules regarding magic that I liked in older editions, particularly 2nd edition. I really like the feel of mystery that comes to magic items, so I have, not all the time, but often utilized older rules where identifying via magic was either costly or less reliable, and playing around with an item was the best way to discover what kind of magics it has, and putting hints into the item items and making it kind of an exploratory mystery to learn what your magic items do. I should probably do a video about that kind of thing at some point. If that's something that you guys would like, let me know. But yeah, that's one that I've brought forward. And then I've also brought forward the idea of opposed schools of magic, which was this great little chart back in second edition. And somebody who was a specialist in one thing was naturally weak in the opposite of it for wizardry. And I've just sort of added that in and conceptually rather than really on a rules basis. But by and large, I'm usually pretty willing to ditch the old mechanics and pick up whatever is current in the edition that I'm playing. When answering what I'm glad got left behind, the first thing that popped into my mind was absolutely THAC0. But THAC0 as a thing, which was the old way of determining what you need to roll on your dice in order to hit an opponent, was sort of indicative of a bigger issue that like second edition in particular had. The D20 system of roll a 20-sided dice and add a bonus to it in order to meet a number that you're aiming for was surprisingly revolutionary when third edition came out, even though it seems like an absolute duh Freddy to just make people do addition. In second edition, there were lots of things where some things you needed to roll high, other things you needed to roll low, some things you had to subtract from things, and low numbers were good, and other things high numbers were good, and it got really convoluted and annoying in terms of just having to know the specific thing and then wanting different stuff to come up on your dice depending on whether or not you're making an attack roll or a saving throw or a proficiency check, the precursor to abilities. And so the high roll desire and THAC0 in general, super glad that doesn't exist anymore. And then from third edition, I would say that the endless strings of bonuses for the simulationist style of play, I am not sad to see that go either. While I realize it still sort of exists in Pathfinder play, and I enjoyed my 3.0 and 3.5 days. There were some of my greatest stories and some of the greatest times that I ever had. I do not miss having a 30-minute discussion on the grapple rules or spending 15 to 20 minutes trying to eke out every possible bonus on a challenging climb check, as I got a bonus for being in a corner and a bonus for the walls being close enough together to use it as a chute, plus the bonus for the rope and extra because it was knotted. I'm super glad that is not how 5th edition works, and that I can just sort of ballpark it, ad hoc it, change the DC to match the situation, and let the player just roll dice, and we can move forward without having to spend so much time stuck in the mechanics instead of in the story. And so, yeah, those would be the things I'm glad got left behind. Regarding if I've used a change in editions to push people into trying another RPG, or if this is the time to try another RPG, my answer is no. Not that it's a bad thing to do so, and if your group is interested and you are interested in trying another role-playing game, then any time is a good time to just jump in and do that. You should absolutely be trying other games if that's what you're looking for, if you're not enjoying the gameplay that you're getting. For me personally, Dungeons & Dragons has always scratched my itch, and though I've played a number of other games when somebody wanted to run them, and so I got the chance to play, I've never really had a desire to go into a whole bunch of different games and learn a bunch of different systems. I would much rather master a specific system than learn a bunch of different systems. And I feel like there's not enough rules mastery, like appreciation out there as there maybe should be, because the more time we spend getting to know our system and mastering it, the smoother our games can run and the better the content can actually end up being. We have a lot of great story-driven content available to us, but if we don't know our rules, it actually bogs down that story and makes what is a really awesome story and plot seem clunky and confusing and frustrating because we're spending so much time trying to parse through the rules. If your group, and you in specific, feel like you need an opportunity to force people into trying a new game, then you should sit down and have a candid conversation that you would like to try something new and that you are being dissatisfied with the game that you've got running, and then go ahead and do that. But for me, D&D covers pretty much everything that I'm looking for. If I get a chance to play in some other system, I might do so, but I don't want to fill my head with a whole bunch of rules for some other game, except as experiments to briefly look at them and see if there's something that I can't draw out of it to add into my game or adapt to the rules that I use. I'm just not built that way, me personally. Thanks, B. Lynn, for those questions about the past and my transitions beyond. And now, watch me learn it. Let's talk about a little bit about how to actually make this come to pass. First and foremost, when it comes to your managing player expectations about this edition change, being frank and open and having a good line of communication with your players is pretty much the key to any kind of decent player expectation. Also, knowing yourself and how you're going to approach this change and how likely you are to need additional time and the like is going to be kind of key. So it's hard to give firm advice on managing those expectations, except that you should have the conversation. The common advice is to have a session 0 when you're starting a new campaign. When you switch rules from 5th edition to D&D 24, you should be almost certainly having at least a mini version of that session 0 again to explain your understanding of the rules, to explain how it's going to change things and how you're going to approach that change, whether you're going to take an a la carte approach and just slowly pull the pieces of the rules in that you like, or whether or not you're just going to rip the bandage off and get it done. You should have that conversation with your players and take the time to set those expectations by just talking about it, find out what your players want, what they like, and what you're willing to do, and find that middle ground together. I can't recommend enough just taking a couple hours and talking it all through instead of just assuming that you're on the same page or laying out some kind of a document that tells people what's going to happen. It's almost always better to involve everybody at the table in the discussion, because while the DM is approaching this as a hobby and it's going to be a much greater burden on the DM, everybody at the table needs to be a part of the changes that are coming, because everybody at the table is going to be affected. And of course, there are going to be times when, even though you've talked it out beforehand, you have some debate over specific things related to the game. And rules are going to be a big one that pops up on that. For me personally, I play most of my D&D, all of my professional games are played online, and so I have access to Google and access to D&D Beyond at all times and can run through the rules pretty quickly using search engines and stuff. And so my general rule during play in general, even using 5th edition, is a 30-second rule. And my 30-second rule is not about dropping food and picking it up and eating it later. It's about telling my players, okay, I'm going to look that up, and I've got 30 seconds. If in those 30 seconds that I can't find the answer to the debate between us about rules, then I rule in favor of the player and run the game the way that they thought things were going to work out in that situation, just so that they can stay engaged in the game and stay focused, and they don't feel frustrated or have any kind of angst over what's going on. And I write down that rule, look it up later, and deliver a final verdict based on my opinion and the rules that I can find, and that becomes law for moving forward from there. But because I bent in the first place, players don't usually find that as frustrating. If you're only using physical books, like if you're using the new 2024 Player's Handbook and you haven't got it on D&D Beyond, then I would recommend probably giving yourself 60 seconds for that, and cut yourself a little bit of slack that you're going to have to look up rules more often than you did previously while you're still adjusting to things. And of course, be willing to just, wing it and continue on with the 5th edition stuff that you have memorized when you're not sure that there's any change, because there's only a certain number of changes in the system, and you don't need to be using any of them in any particular instantaneous moment to where it's going to ruin your game if you get something wrong one time. So cut yourself a little bit of slack on that one. And again, have this conversation with your players during the new session 0 or whatever you want to call it, that little get together to manage expectations, as part of that, tell them, hey, we're going to be a little bit slower because of this, and this is how I'm going to manage rules disagreements for the new edition based on the knowledge that each of us has managed to gather. And I kind of alluded to an answer to the question earlier about how to actually make the transition, and I've used both methods previously, and honestly, they both work really, really well. But the only real ways to make the transition from one edition to the next is to either a la carte it and add in little rules piece by piece as either you learn them or you like them, and discuss that with your group beforehand and choose the pieces that you're going to bring in from around the new rule set and slowly work your way from straight 5th to 5.5, which is kind of the approach that my table took when we made the transition from 3rd edition to 3.5, and it worked out all right. We just slowly transitioned as we liked the different pieces, and as they became more and more interconnected, we started pulling more and more over until eventually we were just running the new rule set. But of course, the other option is to rip the band-aid off and just say we're running 5.5, at which point it does take a little bit more effort to learn those rules and to immerse yourself in them. I highly recommend Treant Monk's Temple as a YouTube channel that's just issuing out this changelog-esque style of video on all the things that are different in the books so that you can just learn the changes that you're going to need and be ready when you get your copy to be able to make that transition if you haven't already got your book. I think that a la carte or rip the band-aid are pretty much the only two ways that you can make the transition from editions. But if there's another way, then somebody should leave it in the comments, and hopefully we can get a conversation started around it to help anybody else that would prefer a third option. If you're new here, these musing topics are a staple of the channel, and since you stayed all the way to the end, you should probably subscribe, and hey, maybe submit your own topic down in the comments, and it might be next. Regardless, everybody, thanks for watching. Happy adventuring.